The air was thick with the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. White chairs adorned with silk ribbons lined the backyard of the old colonial mansion. Guests dressed in their finest gathered under a canopy of twinkling lights, their laughter and clinking glasses blending with the distant hum of cicadas. It was supposed to be a perfect day, one to remember forever. Yet, as the bride glided down the aisle, a wave of unease rippled through the crowd. At the far edge of the ceremony, a woman stood in the shadows. She was dressed simply in a faded gray dress that clung to her form as though it had weathered storms and sorrow alike. Her skin, deep and radiant like polished ebony, glistened faintly under the evening sun. She made no attempt to hide herself, but her presence was a glaring contrast to the pristine surroundings. Whispers began almost immediately. "Who is she?" a woman murmured, clutching her husband's arm. "Did anyone invite her?" another asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "She looks out of place," a third voice sneered, loud enough for the stranger to hear. The woman's gaze remained fixed on the couple at the altar. Her eyes were pools of quiet determination, but her fingers twisted nervously around the strap of her worn leather bag. Her stoicism only seemed to enrage the guests further, as if her refusal to react was an affront to their comfortable, curated world. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing openly. "Mommy, why is that lady here?" he asked, his voice carrying through the crowd. The mother shushed him quickly, her cheeks flushing red. At the altar, the groom, a tall man with sandy blonde hair, caught sight of her. His smile faltered, his jaw tightening as though he'd seen a ghost. The bride, radiant in her lace gown, glanced at him curiously, her delicate features creased with concern. She followed his gaze, but the stranger had already looked away, her face betraying no emotion. "She shouldn't be here," someone muttered loud enough for the woman to hear. The murmurs grew louder, emboldened by shared judgment. One man, his face ruddy from too much champagne, leaned toward his companion. "She's probably looking for trouble," he slurred. "You know how they are." The woman flinched imperceptibly but stood her ground. She had endured words like these before, cutting, venomous daggers disguised as casual remarks. Yet, this time, the weight of them felt suffocating, amplified by the 100 accusing eyes boring into her. "Maybe she's a server who got lost," someone suggested with a mocking laugh. "She doesn't look like she belongs anywhere near this wedding," another chimed in. The stranger's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to let it show. Her purpose here was greater than their disdain. Her presence, though unwelcomed, was necessary. She tightened her grip on her bag, her knuckles whitening as memories flooded her mind. Memories of a man who once stood beside her, who had promised her things he could never deliver. The ceremony continued, but the guests were no longer focused on the vows being exchanged. Their attention remained on the woman in the shadows, their whispers growing sharper, louder. "Someone should tell her to leave," a matronly woman hissed. "She's ruining everything." The woman's lips parted slightly, as if she might speak, but she hesitated. What could she say to people who had already condemned her? The vows concluded, and the couple was pronounced husband and wife. Applause erupted, but the clapping felt hollow. The bride and groom turned to face their guests, their smiles radiant. For a brief moment, the tension lifted. But then, as the couple began their procession down the aisle, the groom's eyes met the stranger's once more. His step faltered, and his face drained of color. "Do you know her?" the bride whispered, her voice sharp with suspicion. The groom didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. The guests noticed the exchange, their curiosity piqued. The whispers started anew, now tinged with something darker, scandal, perhaps, or betrayal. The stranger stepped forward, her movements deliberate, as if she had waited for this moment. The crowd parted instinctively, their judgment replaced by a growing sense of unease. "She doesn't belong here," someone said again, this time more forcefully. But the woman met the groom's gaze, and in her eyes was a story waiting to be told. A story that would shatter the fragile perfection of this day and reveal the truths they had all tried so hard to bury. The murmurs among the guests grew louder as the woman stepped closer. The vibrant colors of the wedding decor, the pastel flowers, the gold accents, the immaculate white aisle, seemed to mock the tension rippling through the air. All eyes were now fixed on her, each gaze heavy with curiosity, judgment, or outright hostility. The groom took a shaky step forward, his face pale as ash. His bride, her hands still entwined with his, stared at him in confusion. "Who is she, Liam?" she asked, her voice tight. The cheerfulness of moments ago had vanished, replaced by a sharp edge of suspicion. Liam opened his mouth, but no words came out. His hesitation was like blood in the water, and the crowd, sensing the tension, leaned in closer, their collective breath held. The stranger stopped a few feet from the couple, her head held high despite the weight of the stairs. Her eyes bore into Liam's, unwavering and filled with something that looked like betrayal. For a moment, she said nothing, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "Are you not going to introduce me?" she asked finally, her voice calm but laced with an unmistakable edge. The bride flinched, her grip tightening on Liam's arm. "Liam, what is she talking about?" "It's not what you think," Liam stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The bride's gaze darted between him and the stranger, her confusion giving way to anger. "Then what is it, Liam? Who is she, and why is she here?" The woman let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and jarring against the hushed backdrop. "Should I tell her, or will you?" "Don't do this," Liam said, his voice pleading now. He took a step toward her, but she held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't," she echoed, her voice rising slightly. "You don't want me to do this? After everything, you think you can just walk away from it all and pretend none of it happened?" The guests were now fully engrossed, their earlier whispers replaced by stunned silence. Even the servers had paused, trays of champagne teetering precariously in their hands. The bride's eyes flashed with anger. "Liam, I deserve an explanation. Who is she?" The woman's gaze shifted to the bride, and for the first time, a flicker of pity crossed her face. "You're right. You do deserve an explanation." She turned back to Liam, her voice growing steadier, colder. "But I think he owes it to you, not me." "Lyle, please," Liam begged, his voice cracking. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. The bride's face contorted with shock and hurt. "You know her? You've been lying to me?" Lila shook her head, her laughter bitter. "He didn't lie, exactly. He just omitted a few inconvenient truths." She stepped closer to the bride, her tone softening. "You didn't know, did you? You have no idea who he really is?" "That's enough," Liam said sharply, his voice rising for the first time. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Lila interrupted, her voice cutting through his like a knife. "I understand that you left. That you abandoned everything when it got too hard. And now you're standing here, pretending to be someone you're not, hoping your past won't catch up with you." The bride pulled her hand from Liam's, taking a step back. Her expression was a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. "Liam, what is she talking about? What did you do?" Before he could answer, a voice from the crowd broke the tension. "Someone needs to make her leave." She's ruining the wedding. Lila turned toward the voice, her eyes narrowing. Ruining the wedding? She repeated, her voice low but dangerous. Is that what you think this is about? The man who had spoken shifted uncomfortably, but Lila didn't wait for a response. She turned back to Liam, her voice rising. Tell them, Liam. Tell them what you did. Or should I? The crowd held its collective breath as Liam's shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. He looked at the ground, his voice barely audible. Lila, please. Not here. Why not here? She snapped. You think you can hide forever? That this picture-perfect life you've built will protect you from the truth? Lila, stop, he said, his voice breaking. But she didn't stop. Instead, she reached into her worn leather bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is why I'm here, she said, holding it up for everyone to see. What is that? The bride asked, her voice trembling. Lila's eyes locked with hers, filled with a quiet fury. The truth, she said simply, unfolding the paper with deliberate care. Liam took a step forward, panic etched across his face. Don't. But it was too late. As Lila began to read, her voice steady and clear, the truth spilled into the room like a tidal wave, shattering the illusion of the perfect day. And as the final words left her lips, the silence that followed was deafening. The piece of paper trembled in Lila's hands, though her voice was steady as she began to read. This letter is to inform you that your failure to respond to prior communications has left us with no choice but to pursue legal action. Your absence has caused significant emotional and financial distress, and your obligations remain unfulfilled. You cannot run forever. The truth will find you. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The bride, pale and trembling, stared at the paper, then at Liam. What is this? What does it mean? Lila folded the paper and slipped it back into her bag. Her movements were deliberate, as if she wanted every second to stretch into eternity. When she finally looked up, her expression was one of quiet determination. That's just the start, Lila said, her voice cutting through the thick silence. There's so much he hasn't told you. About me. About what he left behind. Liam ran a hand through his hair, his face a mask of desperation. Lila, stop. You don't have to do this. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, she shot back, her voice rising. You had your chance to do the right thing, and you chose to run. The bride stepped forward, her hands shaking. Liam, what is she talking about? What is she accusing you of? He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. His silence was deafening. Lila took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. He's not the man you think he is, she said, addressing the bride directly. He's a coward, a liar, and he left me to deal with the consequences of his actions while he built a new life for himself. The bride recoiled as if struck. Consequences? What consequences? What did he do? Lila's eyes softened slightly as she regarded the bride. For a moment, she seemed almost hesitant, but then her resolve hardened. He left me, pregnant and alone, she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. The words hit the crowd like a bombshell. The whispers erupted into a cacophony of shocked murmurs. The guests, who had moments ago been basking in the glow of a perfect wedding, now looked at Liam as if he were a stranger. The bride stumbled back, her face pale as tears welled in her eyes. Liam, is this true? I didn't know, Liam said weakly, his voice cracking. I didn't know she. Don't you dare lie. Lila snapped, her voice sharp enough to silence him. You knew. I told you, and you promised to stand by me. And then you disappeared. Liam's face crumpled under the weight of her words. I was scared, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I didn't know how to handle it. Scared? Lila repeated, her voice laced with incredulity. Do you have any idea what I went through? The looks, the whispers, the judgment? Do you know what it's like to be a black woman raising a child on her own, with no support and no answers? The bride's tears spilled over as she turned to Liam. How could you? How could you do this to her? To me? Liam reached for her, but she recoiled, her face twisted with disgust. Don't touch me, she said through clenched teeth. The crowd began to shift uncomfortably, their earlier condemnation of Lila now directed at Liam. The same man who had called for her removal earlier now muttered, I can't believe this. What kind of man does that? Lila turned to the crowd, her voice trembling with emotion. You all judged me the moment I stepped onto this property. You whispered about me, mocked me, made me feel like I didn't belong. And all the while, the real shame was standing right here, pretending to be someone he's not. The bride's father, a tall man with a commanding presence, stepped forward. Liam, he said, his voice like thunder, is this true? Did you abandon this woman and your child? Liam looked like a man drowning, searching for an escape that didn't exist. I made a mistake, he stammered. I was young and You were a coward, Lila interjected, her voice icy. And now, here you are, trying to rewrite history as if none of it ever happened? The bride turned to Lila, her voice barely a whisper. What happened to the child? Lila's expression softened, and for the first time, the anger in her eyes was replaced by something else, pain. He's alive, she said. He's beautiful and smart and kind. And he asks about his father every single day. The bride let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her hand. Oh my God! Liam's knees seemed to buckle under him. He sank onto a chair, burying his face in his hands. The crowd, now openly hostile, began to murmur louder, their condemnation growing. But Lila wasn't finished. She stepped closer to Liam, her voice low but firm. You have a choice now, Liam. You can keep running, or you can face what you've done. But know this, I'm not going to let you ruin anyone else's life the way you ruin mine. The tension in the air was palpable, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone present. And as Lila stood there, tall and unyielding, it was clear to everyone that the truth had finally caught up with Liam, and there was no escape. The oppressive silence that followed Lila's final words was broken only by the faint rustling of the wind through the trees. The crowd stood frozen, their gazes darting between Lila, Liam, and the bride. No one knew what to say or do. The pristine illusion of the wedding had shattered, leaving behind the jagged edges of a truth too raw to ignore. The bride, her white gown now a cruel symbol of the purity she had believed in, stood trembling, her fists clenched at her sides. Her voice, when it finally came, was a mix of heartbreak and fury. You lied to me, Liam, she said, each word sharp as glass. You stood in front of me, my family, our friends, and promised me forever. But you've been hiding this entire other life. How could you? Liam rose shakily to his feet, his face a mask of despair. I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought I could move on, start fresh. Start fresh, the bride repeated, her voice rising. With me? While you left her to raise your child alone. What kind of man does that? Liam reached for her, but she took a step back, her eyes blazing. Don't touch me, she snapped. You don't get to touch me. You don't get to lie your way out of this. The guests, emboldened by the bride's anger, began to murmur again. Accusations flew like daggers, each one landing squarely on Liam. I can't believe we ever trusted him. Poor girl, imagine finding out like this. What kind of man abandons his own child? Liam looked helplessly around, his earlier confidence completely eroded. His gaze landed on Lila, and for a moment his expression shifted to something almost pleading. Lila, he said softly, I made mistakes. I know that, but I'm trying to be better now. Please, don't ruin everything I've worked for. Ruin? Lila's voice cracked with disbelief. She took a step closer, her hands trembling. You think I'm ruining your life? Do you have any idea what you left me to face? The shame, the loneliness, the fear? While you were building this perfect little fantasy, I was trying to keep our son fed, trying to make him feel loved despite the fact that his father wanted nothing to do with him. Her words hit like thunder, and for the first time, the crowd shifted their attention fully to her. They saw not just a disruptor but a mother, a woman who had been wronged in ways they couldn't begin to comprehend. The bride's father, who had been standing silently with his arms crossed, finally stepped forward. His voice was low, but it carried a weight that silenced the murmurs instantly. Is it true, Liam? He asked. Did you abandon this woman and her child? Liam's shoulders slumped under the weight of the question. He nodded, his voice barely audible. Yes. The bride let out a choked sob, and her father's face darkened with fury. You're a coward, he said, his voice trembling with restrained anger. You don't deserve her. He turned to his daughter, placing a protective arm around her. You don't have to stay here, sweetheart. You don't have to marry a man like this. The bride's tears flowed freely now, but there was a strength in her that hadn't been there moments ago. She pulled away from her father, her gaze locked on Liam. You don't deserve me, she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. You don't deserve any of this. She turned to Lila, her expression softening. I'm so sorry for what you went through. You deserve better than him, too. Lila nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The bride took a deep breath, then turned to the crowd. The wedding is over, she announced, her voice carrying across the stunned guests. You can all go home. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the guests began to disperse, their murmurs fading into the background as they drifted away. The once celebratory atmosphere dissolved into a hollow silence, punctuated only by the soft rustling of the decorations in the breeze. As the crowd thinned, Lila stood alone, her shoulders slumping as the adrenaline began to fade. She felt exhausted, the weight of the day pressing down on her. The bride approached her, hesitating for a moment before speaking. I don't know what happens next for you, she said quietly. But I hope you find peace. You deserve that much. Lila managed a small, grateful smile. Thank you, she whispered. The bride nodded and turned to leave, her father following close behind. Liam stood frozen, watching them go, his face a mask of regret and despair. Lila turned to him one last time. You have a son, she said softly. A son who deserves better than the man you've been. If you want to be in his life, you're going to have to prove that you're worthy of it. And I'm not waiting forever. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Liam standing alone among the remnants of a day that had unraveled entirely. The days after the wedding were a blur for everyone involved. The town buzzed with gossip, each retelling of the events more dramatic than the last. Liam's once flawless reputation lay in ruins, his life dismantled piece by piece under the weight of his secrets. But for Lila, the aftermath was less about the judgment of strangers and more about the choices she now faced. Sitting alone in her small apartment, Lila stared at a photograph of her son, Marcus. His bright smile and big, curious eyes stared back at her, a reminder of everything she had fought for. She had come to the wedding not out of revenge, but out of desperation, to ensure that Marcus would have what he deserved. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. She froze, her heart pounding. Few people knew where she lived, and even fewer would show up unannounced. She stood, hesitating for a moment before crossing the room to open the door. It was Liam. He stood there, disheveled and visibly shaken. The confidence he had once worn like armor was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that made him almost unrecognizable. "Lila," he said, his voice rough, "can I come in?" She hesitated, gripping the edge of the door. A part of her wanted to slam it in his face, to tell him he had no right to show up here. But another part of her, the part that still believed in second chances, if only for Marcus's sake, stepped aside and let him in. Liam entered cautiously, his eyes scanning the modest space. The room was filled with small, personal touches. Marcus's drawings taped to the fridge, a worn teddy bear on the couch, and a framed picture of Lila holding a baby that sat on the coffee table. "You've done well," he said softly, gesturing to the photo. "He looks happy." "That's because he doesn't know what he's missing," Lila replied, her voice sharp. "I've made sure of that." Liam winced, the words cutting deep. He sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly together. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted. "How about with the truth?" Lila said, folding her arms. "No more excuses, no more running. Just tell me why you left. Why you thought abandoning us was your only option." Liam looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping. "I was scared," he began. "When you told me you were pregnant, I panicked. I didn't think I could be a father. I didn't think I was ready to take on that kind of responsibility. And instead of facing it, I ran." Lila's jaw tightened. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? To Marcus?" "I do now," Liam said, his voice breaking. "I didn't understand back then, but I see it now. I see what a coward I was, how selfish I was. And I hate myself for it." The sincerity in his voice caught Lila off guard, but she didn't let her guard down. "Words are easy, Liam. What are you actually going to do about it?" He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and determination. "I want to be in his life," he said. "I know I don't deserve it, not after everything I've done. But I want to try. I want to be the father he needs, even if it takes the rest of my life to prove to you that I'm serious." Lila studied him, searching for any sign of insincerity. She saw none, but the wounds he had left behind were too deep to be healed by a single conversation. "You don't get to just walk back into his life and play the hero," she said. "If you want to be in his life, you're going to have to earn it. That means showing up, consistently, no matter how hard it gets. And it means putting him first, always." "I will," Liam said, his voice steady. "Whatever it takes, I'll do it." Lila nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling over her. "Then we'll start small. Supervised visits. If you prove to me that you're serious, we can talk about more." Liam's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "I won't let you down again. I promise." But Lila wasn't ready to trust promises. She had heard them before, and they had led to nothing but heartache. "We'll see," she said simply. As Liam left, Lila sank onto the couch, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, hope, and fear. Letting him back into their lives was a risk, but it was one she was willing to take, for Marcus. The weeks that followed were tense but transformative. Liam showed up for every visit, his initial awkwardness giving way to genuine connection as he began to bond with Marcus. The boy, oblivious to the pain that had preceded these moments, welcomed his father with open arms. For Lila, watching them together was both healing and heartbreaking. She saw glimpses of the man she had once loved, the man she had believed in before everything fell apart. But she also saw the scars he had left behind, scars that would take time to fade. One evening, as Marcus slept and Liam prepared to leave, he turned to Lila. "I know it's going to take time for you to trust me," he said, "but I'll keep showing up. For him. For you." Lila nodded, her heart heavy but hopeful. "That's all I ask," she said. As the door closed behind him, she sat in the quiet of her apartment, the weight of the past slowly giving way to the possibility of a different future. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time in years, Lila felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time.